science and technology and innovation, these are indispensable in the modern economy, in the modern world.
We held a meeting at the MSI, and we resolved among about 6 to 8 of us, local members, first to form PAASE Philippines so that we could continue to host meetings here, but also to go on a massive campaign to try to get support from the national government through the legislative and executive branches to invest more in science and technology. So it started with a white paper, a position paper that we co-authored among 6 of us, namely Ernie Pernia, Cesar Saloma, Rador Asansa, Toby Dairita Fateneo, and Alvin Colaba de la Sala, and myself.
So PAASE historically, in the past 10, 20 years for sure, have been collaborating with our counterparts here in the Philippines at various universities. And a lot of these interactions probably started as peer-to-peer. But thankfully, we have the Department of Science and Technology here in the Philippines, and they've come up with some really helpful and very impactful programs that actually enable PAASE members that are based in the United States and other parts of the world to actually come here and do extensive research and academic partnerships and collaborations.
Well, I think that one of the good things that PAASE is doing is really trying to stay in touch with the researchers and the scientists here in the Philippines. So I think that is one of the good programs that they keep on supporting some of the initiatives of our researchers and scientists here in the country, trying to align also their assistance towards the plans of the Philippine government.
It's very important that the PAASE members and scientists based in the Philippines are continuously in contact, so we will know the needs of the Filipinos and opportunities that Filipinos can have to do science with their PAASE counterparts. So these interactions, such as the conference that we're holding and the annual conferences that we have.
The Philippines and the scientists there have very unique perspective that adds to discoveries and inventions, advancing in general the field.
These members, because they are part of an academy, it implies that they are productive. So they have publications, they have innovations, they have inventions, patents, and they have, they have an impact on society. Okay, so these are the people who can convince government, invest more in science and technology, and that was really the gist of our paper, our position paper in 2000. And it is Ernie Pernia who said that R&D by nature is expensive and it is a public good. So it is important for the government to take the lead in investing in R&D.
To increase the economic growth potential of the country, we cannot continue to just rely on traditional inputs into production as capital and labor. We also need to develop our expertise in science and technology and innovation so that we can come up with new systems, new ways of doing things.
I think that science, researchers, industry, and even the government is really like an ecosystem of knowledge. So I think it doesn't really matter if you're coming from a private institution or a public institution, such as a state university. I think we all have a role to play to improve the research capabilities and scientific knowledge here in the country. I think it is about time for us to realize that one of our roles as academics, as researchers, as scientists, is to actually contribute to that global body of knowledge.
And the role of this cooperation among these government agencies really is to be able to attract science and technology, global-based companies to set up shop here. And that is really key in terms of developing the science and technology innovation ecosystem in the country.
Particularly because there's that deep desire. And what PAASE does and can do more of is to promote this relationship between its members.
We really need to ratchet up the appreciation, the recognition of the importance of science and technology and innovation.
And we are all trying to attain what we call the common good, the greater, higher, long-term good of the Filipino people.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we are here tonight to discuss a very important topic that was actually assigned to me, but I gladly accepted by the president of the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering, Dr. Giselle Concepcion. Magandang gabi po sa mga nasa Amerika, magandang umaga sa mga nasa Pilipinas, at magandang araw sa kung saan man kayo naroroon. So today we will be listening to a set of experts on their particular fields, and we'll be focusing on social innovation as a set of processes that affect change for the social good. So for tonight, let me first acknowledge some of our participants and audience from the University of the Philippines, from the University of Rizal System, from the Pambansang Samahan sa Psikolohiyang Pilipino, from Likas Morong, and all our family and friends who are with us tonight. I would also like to welcome Dr. Leah Tolosa Croucher for co-hosting tonight's event with me. So without further ado, let me first enumerate the goals of this tonight's discussion. So for our audience guidance, these are the goals of the group discussion. First, we would like to define and clarify innovative practices or strategies in the context of the Philippine society and culture. You'll notice that our second exemplar, the example that we'll be talking about today, is actually based here in the US, but we will be drawing lessons from that particular example that we may actually try to apply to the Philippine setting. Second, to examine examples of programs using social innovation as methodology and suggest ways to assess their effectiveness. Third, to help identify or prioritize areas where social innovative programs are most needed in the Philippines and elucidate the structural or ground conditions necessary to launch and sustain them. And fourth, which is very important, to explore recommendations for a proposal or policy paper to encourage government at all levels and institutions, I would say at all levels, to promote and apply social innovative practices in heritage, STEM-related programs, or other programs. So let me first again introduce Dr. Leah Tolosa Croucher. Dr. Tolosa Croucher is a program officer at the National Center for Advancing Translational Science at the National Institutes of Health. She actually started in April of this year. As the program officer, she develops new initiatives for advancing new biomedical technologies closer to the patient. She supports extramural grants and contracts with the ultimate goal of improving national health. And she advises grant applicants and monitor awarded grants. She used to be a research professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and also an assistant director for the UMBC Center for Advanced Sensor Technology, or CAST. She was chosen as a visiting scientist and lecturer at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila under the Balik Scientist program, of the Philippine Department of Science and Technology. She was a chair of the board of directors of the PAASE for 9 years, and she used to be, she was a president too of PAASE. She received her doctorate in chemistry from the University of Connecticut, Stores, Mansfield, USA. Leah?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be Mario's assistant tonight. As you can see, social innovation is really not my field, but I am here, I suppose, to learn quite a bit from our discussions tonight. So just a short description of our program. This is a discussion, not a presentation. So we will have initially Mario to give us 2 examples of social innovation, the Museong Pambayan ng Morong and the Meyerhoff Scholarship Program. This will be followed by discussions by our guest discussants. I think you are given about 10 minutes each to give us a short presentation of your expertise in social innovation. And then this will be followed by an open discussion. So we ask the audience to feel free to write your questions on the comments on the chat box. You can also raise your hand if you want to actually speak directly to the discussants. So with that out of the way, I would like to introduce our dear Mario Santo Domingo, friend of all. Mario's expertise is in the area of community and applied social psychology. He received his doctorate degree from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where he is currently a research scientist and adjunct faculty at the Department of Psychology. As researcher and evaluation specialist, he has worked and continues to work with multidisciplinary teams of experts and research professionals to assess efficacy of programs that enhance representation of minorities in STEM careers, including the professoriate, as well as investigate the replicability or adaptability of successful STEM programs in other universities. Mario is the founding president of Lipunang Pangkasaysayan ng Morong Incorporated and is also a board member of PAASE. Mario?
Maraming salamat, Leah. Thank you very much. And so I will now give a short presentation of an overview of social innovation, as well as the 2 exemplars that Leah mentioned. So what is social innovation? Social innovation is a set of processes that affects social change for the common good. So this is a basic definition. So it makes active use or rearranges social and cultural resources, practices, and structures. And it addresses problems that seem to be unyielding to traditional solutions. Among the principles of social innovation are collaboration, iteration or the repetition of experiences, of steps, problem solving, and all the things that you do while trying to affect change in society. Of course, these are self-explanatory, the last 2 principles here, coaching and mentoring, and continuous or lifelong learning. It is said in the literature that social innovation is meaningful if it focuses on needs of people on the ground. It is based on shared assessments, and therefore the needs are determined through this shared or participatory assessment. It informs policy development, for the particular social innovation to be upscaled or to apply to a broader population of people. It also goes beyond technological innovation. Most innovations, are linked to technology, but not all social innovations are focused only on technology. And it has a bottom-up approach that it starts from the ground and continues up to be applied to larger structures in society. Now, what are the steps for initiating a social innovation? First, as already mentioned, it's important that we identify needs. So identification of new, unmet, or inadequately met social needs. Second, the development of new solutions in response to these identified social needs. Third, an assessment or evaluation of the effectiveness of new solutions identified in meeting the identified social needs. And fourth, scaling up of effective social innovation. Now, I'll talk about the first exemplar, the Museong Pambayan ng Morong, and I have a first page here of a published paper in Community Psychology in Global Perspective that talked about the origins of Museong Pambayan ng Morong and of course of the Likas or Lipunang Pangkasaysayan ng Morong, which was actually established to basically push for the museo and for other projects in Morong, or heritage projects in Morong. So the story starts in the small town of Morong in the province of Rizal, in Luzon in the Philippines. For those who don't know where Morong is, you can see here the logo of the museum and an old building, which is a Spanish type building built in 1880 to 1881. This has a long story because it has been transformed into several uses. It has become a garrison during the Japanese period. It has become a school during the American period. It has also became the seat of the local government of Morong for so many years until 2012. So it was the natural choice of the community or of the group of people in the community to become a museum. But there was a problem. When the municipal government left it in 2012, it looked this way. So it was dirty, it was decrepit. There was seemingly no plan for the space. But then I being a member of the community and along with the like-minded members of the community, thought of founding or establishing an organization to push for the establishment of this museum, which we were planning to actually organize in this space. As you can see, as I've said, it was in bad order, it was in bad condition, but then we met and thought that maybe we can try cleaning it. Okay, it wasn't ours. There wasn't any formal agreement, but since there was no plan for it, we thought that maybe if they're not stopping us, maybe we can do something about it and intervene. And so we did. Okay, we started organizing. We talked to the municipal leaders, to the mayor then, Mayor Joseph Benaventura. We start mobilizing, recruiting our members until we reached about the size of like 25 or 30. Right now we have about 100 members. And then it happened. We formulated our goals for this particular museum and for Likas Morong. We wanted to do research. We wanted to promote local history. We wanted to do preservation, maintenance, and curation of common heritage. And we have a long-term goal of actually influencing the curriculum of schools and of community organizations, okay, toward understanding of local history and preservation of local heritage. What were our strategies? Of course, as I've mentioned already, we mobilized the citizens. We recruited and did training and education of our initial members. We also did the fundraising because we didn't have any money then. We also wrote smaller grant proposals. We built some allies in the media, developed some communication strategies. We also advocate for local policies. We started out with memorandum of agreement until the time that it was ready, or we were ready to actually propose some ordinances. And then we did a lot of networking, both horizontal and vertical networking. We tried to connect with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines. It was so timely because then they were forming the local historical commission committees network, okay, of the Philippines, and we became a founding member. And so it happened on April 5th, 2013, we signed a memorandum of agreement with the mayor, and we invited the chair of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and a representative from National Museum. So this day was very important, but we then realized that memorandum of agreements do not really have a power, or does not really have teeth to make sure that the museum will be a space that can be there for a long time, because it can be converted anytime to any use, because we didn't have any legal infrastructure or legal framework to support it. And so we continued to work for the development of the museum until in 2015, it became a formal museum. As you can see here, it has been transformed from that space that was dirty and decrepit to something that we were really proud of. In 2000, the same year, or not the same year, but in 2018, May of 2018, the ordinance was approved by the Sangguniang Bayan. So after 5 years, it actually happened that local policy, a formal local policy, was agreed upon and was signed by the mayor, and it stipulated that Likas Morong will be the steward of the space or of the museum for for many years to come. So these are just pictures of school children visiting the museum. So we had a lot of school tours, even from outside, even from schools outside of Morong. Then we also have here some of the elements that we thought were helpful for us: a sustained program for educating and training members, a sustained set of interactive activities and events. We were mindful that our activities and events, our programs are inclusive. So we have here an art exhibit that was mounted by girls and women artists. We also have a lot of activities for children. So our activities are also developmental. Just a picture of our local policy advocacy here. I've already mentioned what we did in terms of policy. And then we did a lot of networking. So currently we're networking with many towns in Rizal. We also had friends of the museum organize themselves to support the museum financially. It's very, very helpful for us. And then this is just like a photo of the poster for our first annual forum for the history of the province of Rizal, which we will be doing on August 30th. So it's one step toward upscaling our programs. And then we have, of course, the Meyerhoff Scholars Program at UMBC. The Meyerhoff Scholars Program is a strengths-based STEM intervention program. It was established in 1988 as a consequence of some issues related to racial relations. So we consider the Marhoff program as a strengths-based program, and I will explain later. It's cohort-based because the scholars are formed into a community of scholars who study together, advance together, and it's a comprehensive program because it has a lot of elements to it. It's what we call a wrap-around program. Okay. So what is a strengths-based program? It is a strengths-based program, or because we use the paradigm under which we believe that people have many strengths and have the capacity to continue to learn, grow, and change. Our intervention focuses on the strengths and aspirations of the members of the community, so it's also participative. The communities and social environments are seen as being full of resources, and collaboration is a key to learning and achieving. So finally, problems are seen as the result of interactions between individuals, organizations, or structures, rather than deficits within individuals, organizations, or structures. So among the mechanisms of influence, I will not read all of them, but what are the most important here are academic and social integration, and the relationships and networks that facilitate career success. Of course, the role models and the critical mass of like-minded students of color. These are just photos of the selection weekend and some of the other meetings that they do where the alumni of the Scholars Program come back to campus to talk about their experiences in graduate school. Okay. In terms of outcomes, we've found that Marhoff scholars are 2 times more likely to graduate with a STEM bachelor's degree than students who declined the Marhoff offer. Also, that the Marhoff scholars are more than 5 times more likely to enter STEM PhD programs than students who declined the Marhoff offer. So it's a really highly successful program. So this is just another example of how successful it is. UMBC has become the #2 producer of STEM or MD PhD graduates. Yes, that's right. It's also related to it. It's about the STEM PhDs, and UMBC is the top undergraduate school of origin of African American MD PhD recipients in the US, and the second-ranked school of origin of African American STEM PhD recipients. Now, a question is, why hasn't Marhoff been replicated? Because it's been there for a while. So it's only after 25 years that like a formal program to replicate or adapt the program was actually launched. Because in the past, several institutions have attempted to adopt selected elements, but none have achieved similar student or institutional outcomes. There was an untested perception that the outcomes may not be attainable at research-intensive institutions or those that lack senior minority leadership, because the leader, the president of UMBC is like African-American Dr. Rabowski. There was this hypothesis that probably it's the reason why it's been successful. So we tested this belief. A consortium was formed between the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, UNC Chapel Hill, and Penn State, and the funder, Howard Hughes Medical Institute. The rationale is to increase URM representation in STEM and hopefully for these 2 universities to gain similar, if not the same success as the Marhoff Scholars Program. And we actually did find that Marhoff was replicable. So it really depended on the combination of the elements and the use of resources that will be utilized for the success of students under a student-centered scholars program. We found that students who were part of the programs, or the underrepresented minorities as we call them, were significantly the retention rate for URMs and for females, were both significantly greater than the retention rate for URMs who were not part of the program, or of female students who were not of the part of the program. And the comparison sample used here were the matched comparison sample. Okay, and finally, the keys to success. We concluded that actually a commitment to the entire model is really very important. Otherwise, the programs that are trying to adapt or replicate the MARHOP wouldn't be successful because there are elements missing. Sufficient and sustained administrative support are champions from the administration. Recruitment of full-time program staff. So a scholars program that is staffed by full-time employees and those who are also like-minded and believe in the philosophy of the program. An immersive upfront interinstitutional training and sustained guidance. We can also consider this some kind of an interinstitutional mentoring. So where staff of the MARHOP programs were mentoring, staff of the programs in other universities. And then the breadth of faculty participation is very important. One of the top elements or program components of the MARHOP is the faculty involvement. Faculty who believe in the representation, okay, of all types of students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics on campus and in the professions, okay, in the STEM professions. So this concludes my presentation. And as Dr. Leah Tolosa Croucher mentioned earlier, we'll entertain questions later. Our first discussant will be Dr. Ton Clemente, to be introduced by Leah.
Thank you, Mario. That was very informative. So our first discussant is Dr. Jose Antonio Clemente, who is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology, University of the Philippines, Diliman, where he received his master's and bachelor's degree. He is also currently the director of the Office for the Advancement of Teaching in UP Diliman. He completed his PhD in psychology at the University of Macau in China. Dr. Clemente is the current president of the Pambansang Samahan sa Psikolohiyang Pilipino, which in English probably means the National Society for Philippine Psychology. I hope I interpreted that right. His research interests include the social psychology of social inequality and social class, Filipino values and social interactions, and the role of media in education and in minimizing stigma and discrimination. So with that, here is Dr. Jose Antonio Clemente.
Thank you so much, Dr. Leah. Hello po to everybody, and thank you so much for the opportunity to share with you my initial musings on social innovation that will hopefully move our conversation forward. I will be coming from the point of view of a researcher and a teacher who is actually unsure if the work that I will be presenting fits the features of social innovation. Okay, so let me start with 3 questions. So first, who decides when a novel solution that has potential to improve the quality of life is a social innovation? Relatedly, who assesses the value of the work that we do? If an innovation is supposed to benefit people, how important is it for stakeholders, for groups, for people who we are working with to recognize that they have been benefited by the work before we can ultimately say that our work is indeed innovative? I ask this because, again, I am not sure if I am in the best position to say that the research I will share is a good example of an innovation. Because, which leads me to the third question, uh, at this point, our research can still be considered as an evidence-based idea. Okay, it has not yet been implemented. So part of my reflection on our topic is how important is the outcome or the effect, in determining whether something is indeed a social innovation. So how important it is that something has to change, that you've already had an effect, on particular systems, that you've transformed systems or transformed the lives of people. Okay, so having said that, so it's like this is going to be like a meta view of this work. So the presentation partly aims to test whether the research that we did with my collaborators from Ateneo, a research on living wage, fits the features of what we can say an innovation. So our process, as with other innovations, started with identifying a social problem that we wanted to solve. Then, as researchers, we proposed novel ways of framing the problem. And then, the intended social change is still at the level of communicating to people um, what the results are. So we've attempted to disseminate the work through conferences, other academic venues like publications. So the research that I'm going to share with you is currently under review, and we're hoping that it gets accepted for publication soon for more credibility about what I'm going to share. Okay, so I broke down the research into these three components because based on the definition of social innovation, parang these are the important areas that we need to kind of cover. So, what was the social problem? What was something new that you did? And then, is it for the public good? What transformation do you aim to happen? Okay, so what social problem um, what social problem did we want to take a stab at? Okay. My collaborators and I attended a summer school, and in that summer school, our stream focused on poverty reduction. So we were coming from the idea that poverty is restricted opportunity, that one consequence of material deprivation is that poor individuals have fewer choices. And because we had to create a proposal out of that summer school, so we narrowed it down further to the role of income as a means to afford a certain standard of living. And what that ideal standard of living looks like is that people should not just be subsisting day to day, but that we should be thriving. And from there, we looked into how to estimate for a living wage. That uses a psychological lens because my collaborators and I from psychology, and there seems to be a lack of agreement in how to compute for a living wage. And most of what we use would be highly econometric. So an example would be the food basket approach. How much do people need for them to afford this particular food basket? Okay, so what did we do? And I hope that this would seem novel. First, we asked, how can we make the idea of quality of life more culturally specific? So what we forefront in this research is the Magandang Buhay framework. Magandang Buhay, or literally the good life. And this was based on a survey by CSIP and colleagues. The idea is that there are domains or indicators that are important for Filipinos for them to say that they have a good life. And these indicators include housing, savings, mental health, leisure, and religion. So note that these important indicators that Filipinos say they need to have are not only material needs, but also include non-material needs that are socially accepted as valuable in society. Next, we nuance the idea of quality of life further. So we argue that if people have a good life, then we should be able to pursue the goals that we value. And our income should enable us to do that. No? So that's what we refer to as capability gaps. No? So for instance, if you say having a safe place to live is important to you, are you able to achieve that based on your income? So if a magandang buhay domain is important to you and you believe that you cannot attain it, then you have a wide capability gap. Then we ask, is it possible to approximate a living wage using an index of capability gaps? No? So by living wage, we mean the wage rate that allows an individual to pursue what they value. So more importantly, it is the amount where people perceive a step change in their ability to get the domains that they say is important to them. Now, so visually, so we had to test um, the existence of this particular threshold. So I hope you can see my pointer. There is this particular threshold or point where income is said to be sufficient to adequately meet valued outcomes, no? Particular in a magandang buhay. So the implication here is that not all increase in income will lead to ideal outcomes. No? So if we are going to test this particular relationship between income and capability, we should be able to show that at some point there will be that income rate or wage rate that will lead to a change, and people will be able to say, before I cannot achieve what I want, but now this is the sufficient amount where I can perceive that I am able to attain the things that I value. Okay, and then finally, uh, we estimated the monthly wage rate. Now, that represents that point that I showed, at which participants perceive that they are capable to pursue what they value in life. No? So again, for us, this is novel because first, there is that contextualization of what accounts for a good life, followed by the use of a psychological lens in the computation, such that the standard of living is more holistic, so which include material and non-material needs. No? And then finally, we advocate for a living wage, where we move beyond the discourse on identifying a minimum wage. Okay? So what did we hope to happen? So what is the intended societal change? So, well, first is that low wage earners will be able to escape from the poverty trap, no? And for them to have a high quality of life. No? And we found in that research that for so that particular amount, no, where they can say they are capable to achieve what they value, is around 23,000 pesos a month, or around 440 US dollars. No? And this amount, I may add, if I may add, is actually just a little bit higher than the proposed amount of some organizations, like the Ibon Foundation. So they did the food basket econometric approach. And this is sort of a ballpark figure. So we were kind of happy to know that even though we used different approaches, we kind of ended up with the same amount. Okay. I know that I have reached my time, but I hope can I just have 2 more minutes? I'm nearing the end. No? So in moving forward, I think the reflection here now is that we're talking about sowing the seeds of social innovation in the academe. So the question becomes, so who will harvest the work and sell it to stakeholders and policymakers? Because personally, my training as a researcher, I don't know how to do this. I'm not sure how to easily communicate to organizations or to lawmakers that this is the right thing to do and that there is evidence and that maybe we should affect change. For me, the insight also as a teacher is how can we better train academics and researchers to effectively implement potentially innovative ideas. Now, that will go beyond, for example, our social networks. So the tendency usually is we get to approach people that we know and then we try to affect change from there. But if we're going to scale this up, how is that done? And then finally, just some final reflections. So I'd like to use the framework by Van der Haven and Rubalcaba. They did this framework on how you can assess whether your work counts as social innovation. No? And this is just the general idea that the view here is we're more presenting a model to introduce change. We're focused more on a process, no? A method for estimating living wage based on capabilities. And then our levels of analysis include cultural domains, no? Systems or institutions in the form of organizations, and then individuals in the form of what they value. But I'd like to end this presentation by saying that maybe part of the definition of our social innovations might need to include an explicit agenda. Because if we say that an innovation should improve people's quality of life, how does that look like? But if there is an agenda, like we are all moving towards social justice, then I guess it makes it clearer or easier to say that, oh, indeed, we've made good change, we've effected change because we have created systems where people have equal opportunities, and that there is social justice for all. Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry for exceeding the time, and look forward to your questions and comments on this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ton. That was really a very illuminating discussion. In fact, the last model that you presented that included an agenda about social justice leads us to our next speaker, because her pie sketch, as I have it right in front of me, has a word justice on it. Our next speaker is Dr. Maria Corazon de Hungria. Is Dr. de Hungria here? Let me just...
yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Okay, yes. Dr. Maria Corazon de Hungria is currently head of the DNA Analysis Laboratory at the National Sciences Research Institute at UP Diliman. She earned her PhD in microbiology from the University of New South Wales in Australia. And she won a Promising Star Award in 2016, has worked tirelessly to use science in the service of justice, okay? Helping to draft legislation regarding the use of DNA evidence to improve the criminal justice system, and launching the Innocence Project, an organization that seeks to help inmates in different Philippine penal colonies who claim to have been wrongfully convicted. Dr. de Hungria is multi-awarded. I'll not read all of her awards, but she was an outstanding young scientist from the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology. She was also awarded the 10 Outstanding Women in the Nation Service. She was recently awarded the Henry Seeley Scholarship Award from the Forensic Science Foundation at the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Annual Conference in Anaheim, California. Recently, Dr. de Hungria and her team also won the Outstanding Scientific Paper from the National Academy of Science and Technology just early this year, 2020. Dr. Cora?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Good morning, sir. Good morning to all the participants, and thank you for the invitation. No, I don't have slides, so I'll just read through the material that I have prepared. Thank you, Dr. Santo Domingo. Actually, the introduction focused a lot on the work that I've done in terms of the study of DNA as a powerful tool for human identification for forensic applications. However, for this particular reactions, I decided to use our work, our research interest in studying DNA to look at genetic genealogy and ancestry. I've entitled my reaction as Genetic Genealogy and Ancestry, Exploring What is Written in One's DNA. So let me proceed. Genealogy is the study of families and tracing of their lineages and history. We know that our DNA is inherited from our mother and our father, and then also from their own parents. So studying one's genealogy may be motivated by many reasons, such as 1, in determining a family's place in national history. 2, in preserving the family's past for future generations. And 3, in contributing to the storytelling of the events that had passed so many years before. Traditional genealogical research involves the gathering and study of documents, including worn-out government records, and we know that this happens in the Philippines, as well as oral narratives to determine the relationship of one individual to a family. Here is where the social innovation that I will be talking about comes in. I will be exploring the contribution of genetic studies to this discussion, how we explore what is written in our DNA in order, and I quote Dr. Santo Domingo, to address problems that seem unyielding to traditional solutions, close quotation. So genealogical DNA tests gain popularity because of the relative ease in determining relationships, such as paternity and maternity between a parent or an alleged parent and a child. The availability of what we call lineage markers, which further extends the scope of the type of familial relationship that may be tested with greater accuracy through several generations, had significantly increased the use of these tests. The use of Y chromosomal DNA that is passed from fathers and sons, and mitochondrial DNA that is passed from mothers to children have opened possibilities to traditional genealogists and historians. Therefore, genetic genealogy may now serve to supplement the traditional genealogical research. In the Philippines, where many government records are difficult to find, may contain inaccuracies or are no longer available, the availability of genealogical DNA tests provides an alternative option for researchers in tracing family histories across generations and define the collective history of a people or a community. In addition to the Y chromosome in mitochondrial DNA, single nucleotide polymorphism, or what we call SNPs, may be used to characterize the genetic ancestry of persons. The results of genome scans may be subjected to further analysis in order to identify a panel of what we call ancestry informative markers, or simply called AIMS, that would distinguish a family or a population from other samples who are not members of the group. For example, we currently have an existing collaboration with Australia, wherein we're looking for specific aims that could differentiate a Filipino from other Asian groups or Asian populations. It is not easy, we're still waiting for the results, but the initiative has been started. In doing this, a better understanding of a family or a population's genetic association or differentiation with others may be obtained. In the Philippines, the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development of the Department of Science and Technology, or the DOS CPCHRD, has generously supported population genetics research for a number of years. Our population genetics research, also in collaboration with the Institute of Human Genetics of UP Manila, have aimed to characterize the DNA of our Negrito population. So far, we've collected from 34 different Negrito tribes, or groups, in the entire archipelago, as well as collaborations with the Archaeological Studies Program, wherein we collected samples from 8 different communities in the island of Mindoro. I currently have another project with the Commission on Higher Education and the National Commission on Culture and the Arts, which aims to study the different groups of Samba Sulta. Sambas, which means Sambuanga, Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi, which actually brought us to the Tumapon Island, courtesy of the Philippine Coast Guard later last year. We took a 16-hour boat ride from Zamboanga to Mapon Island, which is closer to Borneo, but is still part of the Philippines, in order to collect samples from our brothers and sisters from that island. We aim to characterize the DNA of 17 regional populations, including the latest regional addition of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region of Muslim Mindanao, and those of the 110 ethno-linguistic groups that have been identified by the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples. Majority of these groups have been identified as indigenous cultural communities or indigenous peoples based on the list that was provided by NCIP. We intend to use whole genome sequencing technology and next generation sequencing to study the genetic ancestry or relationships of Filipinos and to compare the genetic data of different groups that were discovered based on anthropology, archaeology, linguistic, and cultural studies. We intend to add genetics into the discourse. This initiative aims to contribute to this very important historical research in order to understand our prehistoric past. This is what we call molecular anthropology. how we moved and adapted into this archipelago we call home. Population genetic studies also provide us the information on how we are able to live the present, using our DNA that provide us the innate tools to protect ourselves internally, such as population genetic studies for health. And we see this with the current pandemic. We're in research, we're not into this, but the health groups are studying population genetics in order to understand how our bodies can actually protect ourselves from the coronavirus, or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, sorry. Other innate tools to protect ourselves can also be done externally, i.e. studying the genetic variations that we have across different populations and individuals in order to identify sources of DNA samples. And this is what we call forensics. Hopefully, when we gain a better understanding of the past and the present, we are also able to better prepare for the future, knowing full well that our anthropogenic activities now affect the environment that we must conserve for future generations. The study of genetic genealogy and ancestry are also expected to contribute in the social discourse of defining the genetic relatedness of different groups of people within and outside of the physical boundaries of our nation. So what we're trying to offer is that once we understand our own DNA as a nation, we can actually use that information to compare and discover relationships that we have in this region that, of Asia and the Asia Pacific. It is with this perspective, and I was asked to talk about the Likas Morong and Museum Pambayan ng Morong project. It is with this perspective that I approach the Likas Morong and Museum Pambayan ng Morong project. My father's parents both came from Morong. These are the Diungria clan from the paternal side and the Kalma clan from the maternal side. Growing up, I did not have many opportunities to go to Morong with my father. Hence, I'm only learning now about the history and culture of the place and its people when I attended the first Huntahan meeting in December last year, organized by Dr. Santo Domingo. During the Huntahan, Dr. Santo Domingo asked the attendees to construct their family pedigrees based on their personal narratives. I brought the only remaining paternal aunt that I have in the Philippines, who was still, fortunately, able to recall the names of her relatives. We managed to construct our family pedigree, at least some of it, and discover family that I did not know, ties which I intend to pursue in the future. So for the past 20 years, since I became interested in the amazing cultural and genetic diversity that we have in the Philippines, it was the Likas Morong project that made or brought this interest up close and personal. And in this context, this is what I think is very important in understanding the research about our genetic history. It cannot be simply theories of how different groups are related to each other, but it is in understanding this diversity that we become proud of being part of our community in a small scale, as well as the Philippines in a greater scale. This is how we understand, and this is what we have been proposing and justifying the support from the Philippine Council for Health Research and Development. It is in understanding our genetic diversity that we are able to find unity in that diversity. And with that, I finish my reaction. Thank you. Sir?
Thank you, Dr. Diungria. Now we'll go to the next discussant.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Diungria. Next, I will introduce Professor Josephine Junicio. She is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Sociology, College of Sciences and Philosophy, University of the Philippines, Diliman, where she earned her Bachelor's of Arts and Master of Arts degrees in sociology. She has engaged in several collaborative and interdisciplinary research projects on technology and social development, which seek to build inclusive rural industrialization. Her research projects in the past include the development of a village-level coconut processing plants in poor rural communities, and the provision of internet access to remote rural schools. More recently, her research involvement includes looking into the risks and uncertainties related to the transition to low carbon energy options for off-grid areas, the development of village-level water remediation plants in areas with arsenic-contaminated water sources, and the deployment of community cellular networks in geographically isolated rural areas. Before joining the academe, Jo was a development NGO worker where she has developed the commitment to pursue social justice. This commitment continues to be her main motivation in teaching and research. So, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Josephine Junicio.
Okay, maraming salamat po. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I am not a doctor. I do not have a PhD, but I am a proud holder of a Master of Arts degree in sociology. So good evening and good morning to my side of the world. Thank you to PAASE and to my former professor, Dr. Mar Santo Domingo, for this opportunity to share with everyone my insights or our insights on a project we've been implementing since 2015. It is the Village-Based Station Connecting Communities through Mobile Networks, or BBTS COCOMONETs, as an example of what I believe is an example of social innovation. So we all know that globally, the mobile communications have been touted as one of the most disruptive technologies, and which has led to closing the gap, at least helping closing the gap of what is referred to as the digital divide. But still, billions, a huge chunk of the global population remains unconnected. In the Philippines, there's an estimated 10,000 villages out of our 42,000 villages which remain unconnected or without access to any form of telecommunications and even to mobile services. And these are usually the most isolated, poorest rural areas, remotest rural areas in the country. The traditional telephone communications company would not dare or hesitant to invest in these types of areas because it would be impossible for them or difficult for them to recoup their huge investment. Investment would be huge, first because of the type of terrain or geographic isolation that is characterizing these areas. The model, the technological model that is incumbent requires huge amount of capital. So therefore, telcos conventionally prefer to invest in more densely, more populous areas, because geographically isolated areas are less populated. These villages would not meet the minimum number of residents that would ideally bring the cost to a more viable level. Okay, so that's the problem, no? So what has been the global solution to address this problem? So in my presentation, I would focus on the concept of community networks, which is a global social innovation, a global technological and social innovation, which aims to bring communications to unserved villages, and from this access to communication to enable these villages to gain other services. The main characteristic of community network is that management and control is shared by the local actors or the villagers. It enables interaction around technology. As a global movement, some of the more illustrious examples would be found in Spain, to the DeFi.net organization. They provide Wi-Fi and fiber optic access to what were originally unserved villages. In Mexico and in the Philippines, we have the provision of cellular services. In Mexico, it's Rhizomatica. In the Philippines, it is the BBTS Cocomonets project. And more recently, in some parts of Papua New Guinea and Indonesia, there's the community LTE, or the provision of internet connectivity. So in the Philippines, BBTS Cocomonets is CCN, Community Cellular Network. So how were we able to implement this project in the Philippines? It is through the Philippine-California Advanced Research Institute program of the Philippine Commission on Higher Education, or the CHED-PICARI program. So, but of course, the BBTS project was also supervised and evaluated, reviewed by the Department of Science and Technology. So in itself, the PICARI, you would notice that the PICARI of CHED is in itself a social innovation. Its main intention was to promote collaboration between researchers, the community of academics and researchers from the University of California system and in universities in the Philippines. And through that collaboration, hopefully to come up with feasible solutions to persistent problems, and in the process develop the capability of provincial, local, state colleges and universities by bringing them into the research collaboration. So for BBTS Cocomonets, this project is a collaboration between the College of Engineering and the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy in UP. We have partners in UC Berkeley and UC Davis, and in the University of Washington. For our provincial partner, we have partnered with the Aurora State College of Technology. But what is this project really about? So briefly, the technological component aims to study the feasibility, sustainability of deploying alternative technologies. I would just read from the slide. It addresses the lack of coverage in remote rural areas by providing low-cost, low-power, compact BTS, or base transceiver stations. So the incumbent model is to build huge towers that would cover a wide area, use proprietary materials owned by Huawei, Nokia, to be able to provide cellular access. But for this technology, all of those things is in a much smaller scale. The towers just 10 meters high, covering just a village, but providing that village with cellular access, because some of the proprietary requirements as innovations were made so that they would, the tower would just use software developed for the BTS. It uses alternative source of power like solar. So it's customized as a network for small communities. Okay. So I am not an engineer or an IT scientist, so I will not be able to discuss the details of that, but that's basically the technological aspect of this project. It challenges the dominant model of huge, wide coverage, expensive, capital-intensive technology and develop a smaller scale, village-based technology that may be managed by the villagers themselves. So in terms of the social dimension, we wanted to look into the process of social change in the community when they have gained access to mobile communications. And I would probably, towards the end of my presentation, link it up with the presentation of Dr. Clemente earlier about the threshold of changes in income to assess impact of development intervention. Another dimension is to look into the needs of communities for effective and sustainable use of new technology, specifically in terms of social infrastructure. The argument is that social change, it is not sufficient to introduce technological innovation to effect social change. So you would have to have social infrastructure, social technology that would be implemented in the process of introducing and developing that technological intervention. So it is not, it veers away from technological determinism. Okay. And of course, to examine existing policy environment for communications technology. So for our sites, this is just a small research project, a pilot research project for the BBTS. After scouting several areas, we have finally decided on 7 coastal communities in Aurora province. These are remote coastal villages. They are inaccessible, or they are bounded by the Sierra Madre mountain range and the Pacific Ocean. Isolated in that sense. You have to ride a 3 to 4 hour boat ride from Baler to reach that cove, or otherwise you have to take a walk 3 to 4 days through the mountain range just to reach the next urban center. So they are isolated in that sense. So without concrete roadwork, services, definitely no cellular signal for some residents. They would have to walk several days to reach a spot where they could, get a cellular phone signal. 80% of these lands are protected areas and mainly agricultural. And what is surprising, many of these villages that are unconnected, they have no cellular signal, they cannot access internet or mobile communications, but many residents own a cellular phone, a mobile phone. Because when they're inside the community, they use a cellular phone for other things, like as a radio, as an entertainment device. And then when they need to communicate, they would go out of the village to find a signal to use that device as a phone. Okay. So as I said, the argument is that technology by itself cannot successfully become introduce change or sustain that change. You would have to build social institutions, what we refer to as social infrastructure. So we did that in many levels. At the national level, we had to secure the support of the main company that is the network operator, the main network operator. We had to secure their buy-in into the project. It was a long, tedious negotiation with them, but eventually we got that MO was signed with them. And then we forged a memorandum of understanding with the local government, with local partners, as I've said, the Aurora State College of Technology, and then from the 3 municipalities where our 7 communities were located, we partnered with the local government unit, and we were it was good that the sitting local executives at the time when the project was implemented was very supportive of the project. Aside from partnering with the local government unit, it was also necessary for the implementation of the project to partner with local cooperatives, because the idea is for the community network to be managed as a social enterprise. And that to be managed as a social enterprise, you would have to have an organization that would be able to do that. So the first thing that comes to mind, what is available in these areas are local farmer cooperatives. What we found out is that these cooperatives are, many of these, for the sites that we chose, there were no existing cooperatives. The existing cooperatives were somewhere else. So we had to devise a system wherein we could convince the more experienced cooperatives to help out our sites in developing business, social enterprise systems, and for people in our sites to cooperate, to collaborate with the cooperatives, developing their buy-in and their claim to the network as their own. So that's another level of partnership that we had to support. So it was important these partnerships were important for many things, like securing the necessary permits, participation in capacity building activities, and for the local government unit to ensure sustainability, to allocate the necessary funds in their annual budget that would sustain the network. So these are the municipalities that where our sites were located and the corresponding cooperatives that we found there. So aside from those partnerships at the national, provincial, and local levels, we also conducted community trainings and workshops. Of course, it would seem difficult at first that the people in this area would be able to manage and control a highly technological or technical project like the BBPS, which consists of a tower, antenna, and the whole system. But our engineers from UP developed a curriculum and a training design that would enable our community partners to enable them to manage a daily routine of maintenance, install systems that would enable them to ask for help for more complicated troubleshooting needs. The technology itself was developed, designed such that it would be simple enough for community villagers to monitor and control. So that's level one. Another level of capacity building. So there are different levels of capacity building. Another level would be with the partner provincial state college, because for more complicated troubleshooting needs, it would be the engineering office of the LGU or the engineers and technical persons in the provincial state college that should be able to assist the communities at the village level. And at the same time, to enable them, the intention of those training programs were to enable them to generate their own research questions and to implement them. So there are different types of trainings at level one, the maintenance, daily maintenance, etc. And then the level two is with the ASCOT faculty and students, not only on the technical aspect, but also in the social science research methods. So what were we, at the beginning, we were envisioning that the introduction, the provision of access to mobile communications would have an impact on the lives of these communities. For our partners in Berkeley, one of their focus was to see how access to communications would expand the social network of people in these communities. No? Another level of that question would be how that social network would actually translate into what is referred to in the literatures as social capital. All in the framework that that change would eventually lead them to higher levels of income. No? So their marginalization because of economic deprivation would be lessened. That's one of the, so they did a randomized controlled trial for this research project, and they wanted to see hard evidence of impact. So initially, what is found is, of course, they have accessible, the technology is highly appreciated because it has provided them the accessible, cheaper, more convenient means of communication. For our part, in the Department of Sociology, we focus on the more qualitative methodology in assessing impact. After the towers were set up and the network became operational for at least a year, we conducted key informant interviews and focus group discussions in the framework of oral history, meaning that what is narrated is what is what is the first idea narrated is what is the most important to the respondent. Okay. And from those interviews and discussions, what we gathered was they were describing the impact of the project, not immediately in terms of increasing income, but a dominant theme in their description was ginhawa. Now, in many of the respondents, it was the term ginhawa or well-being. We would understand the term ginhawa as well-being. It was the sense of relief that they are now able to communicate with their sons or daughters who had to go to the capital to pursue education. They felt a sense of relief that they are able to communicate with their producers and customers in the city center, reducing, therefore, the anxiety caused by lack of information, reducing the anxiety caused by additional cost because, like, from their coastal village, they would go to this to Baler, which is the capital, to buy goods or to talk with buyers of their produce, maybe waiting for several hours or taking additional transportation costs because it would have to be because that is how unpredictable the nature of their life was before they got access to communications in their villages. But when they had access to communication in their villages, they were able to talk to buyers and suppliers, and life became more predictable, and that predictability translated into a sense of relief as narrated by our respondents. And it was also striking that some of them would say that what was ordinarily enjoyed in Manila, having access to cellular communications, now they are also able to access that. So that sense of being included, we interpret that as a sense of being included. So what's my point here? So in development interventions like this, it's difficult to immediately measure changes in income that would be ultimately life-changing. Much less to see that change in income and changes in lifestyle in the long term, specifically precisely because of the precarious conditions of people in these marginalized areas, such that in one of the articles that came out of this research project, and we have submitted it for publication. Hopefully, it has passed through the first round of review. Hopefully, it would eventually get published. Our argument in that article is to say that impact evaluations for projects like this, for social innovations like this, would have to be refrained away from strictly economistic terms. It has to be reframed to include impact that is non-material and coming from the voices, what we call the voices from the last mile. So projects like this, to be truly for social justice, would have to listen to the voices of so-called beneficiaries or clientele. And therefore, we have to become adept. We have to be able to understand their vocabulary, their ways of expression. In this case, it was emotions, which was their primary way of expressing what to them are the important lasting impact of having access to a simple service such as being able to use mobile phones or mobile communications. So for that article, that was our argument. So social impact assessment would have to be reframed in such a way that it would accommodate voices of the marginalized, and the marginalized in this situation express themselves using emotions. No? Their evaluative statements were not in terms of income but it was more about the sense of relief that they got from the project, which is could easily be dismissed. And in fact, it is dismissed because, when you talk to the big telephone telcos, the powers controlling this industry, that is not their bottom line. Their bottom line is, would it bring business? But the only reason to invest in these precarious areas would be if it is assured of returns. So that would be defeating the purpose of extending social service to those who are most marginalized, because you will not be able to see the change, not in the short term, and maybe it would be too far along in the long term to see that change happen, because whatever gain they may have increase in income, okay. But one typhoon, one earthquake would easily reverse that. So if that is your only reason to invest in these marginalized communities, then you're not really listening to the needs of the marginalized and the voices in the last mile. Okay, so these are just some of the economic benefits out of the introduction. You have created jobs and business and connection for small scale businesses. So I would like to end my presentation there. I hope I did not get into overtime. Thank you very much, and I would appreciate your questions and feedback at the end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Trinicio. We'll go to the next presenter, our discussant, Keith Harmon. Keith is the director of the Meyerhoff Scholars Program at UMBC, which Science Magazine has called the gold standard for how to diversify the US academic research community. To date, more than 500 Meyerhoff scholars have earned PhD and MD PhD or joint MD PhD degrees. And UMBC leads the nation in African American undergraduates who go on to earn MD PhDs. Mr. Harmon has worked to support students in higher education for 21 years, including through the Meyerhoff program and Maximizing Access to Research Careers, or MARC program. He focuses on refining and advancing best practices for undergraduate STEM success and implementing effective approaches with partner institutions across the nation. Mr. Harmon is originally from Georgia. He earned a Bachelor's of Music in Piano Performance from Jacksonville University and a Master's of Music in Piano Performance from the Jacobs School of Music at Indiana University, Bloomington. He is currently pursuing a doctorate in language literacy and culture at UMBC. Okay.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quickly. There's a lot of things on it. Let's see if it goes much more smoothly than I hope. Awesome, yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. So again, and I will be brief. Again, thank you to Mario and Leah for inviting me to speak. I feel sort of like an imposter because Mario is one of the world's experts on the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. He and his colleagues do wonderful research and evaluation on our program, and they know it intimately and deeply. And so we are always thankful for them for their work. And also Leah Tolosa Crutcher has mentored a number of students at UMBC, scores, a number who have been Meyerhoff scholars and have gone on to do wonderful things and have benefited tremendously from her in-depth, caring, structured coaching, mentoring, advising over the years. And so it's just wonderful to be a part of this organization and this event with such wonderful friends and colleagues this evening. So Mario has already shared a bit about our program. And so my lift is light. And so I have here my contact information for you. But I'll just give you some brief information that'll just fill in some gaps. Again, the Meyerhoff program is now about 32 years old actually. And you know, founded by our now president, Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, who is a product of a historically Black college and university. Many of those schools began right after the Civil War here in our nation to educate former slaves and the children of former slaves. And for decades, they were the only places Black folks, African Americans in the United States could go and get a college degree and get advanced training. And so Dr. Hrabowski is a product of one of those institutions, and again, spoke and really has a sense that what has made those institutions special and what made them so effective is, again, this strong sense of worth that they gave to students. And they also surrounded students with others who are like them. And so regardless if you were in the arts, like myself in training, or you're in STEM, you are surrounded by others who are like-minded, who look like you, who may have come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, but there were some things in common, and there was a space where folks were affirmed, and that was terribly important. The program began in 1989. It began in 88. In 1989, the first cohort of students arrived on campus. They were Black men, 19 African-American Black men from the state of Maryland. And in 1990, the program was open to include African-American women. And in 1996, the program was open to include all students, regardless of race or ethnicity, who have an interest in a STEM PhD or the combined MD PhD, and very important, an interest in the issues related to underrepresentation in STEM. So, you know, when a good researcher goes to do some work, they go to the literature, right? And so historically, this had been written about for decades in our nation, particularly in the last century. We knew what impacted underrepresented minorities from succeeding in STEM. And so when you started to go in education in general, but particularly in STEM, when Dr. Hrabowski went to design this program, you know, he went and looked at the literature and looked at the idea that, well, you know, we're seeing in higher education when folks of color show up, there are generally low expectations placed on them. So what do? You build a program based on high expectations. And this idea that oftentimes in predominantly white universities, often, you know, there's some academic and cultural isolation for students of color. And so you build a program based on a cohort model where they're working collaboratively and together, and you're building a critical mass of participants. This idea of motivation and performance vulnerability in the face of stereotype threat. You constantly surround the students with positive messages. What's really important in the Meyerhoff program is that, yeah, we help students understand the best practices for undergraduate student success in STEM, but we also help them to realize they are part of a continuum and something bigger than themselves. They are part of a movement, a program, an experiment, social experiment that is really looking to make a difference. And that gives them something larger to believe in, and it's terribly important. You surround them with like-minded peers, you give them adequate advising, you give them research experiences so they can apply that difficult coursework to an actual problem in a research lab or an internship. And you put them in an environment that is perceived to be supportive. You know, the program is embraced, Mario said it's a wraparound structure, it's embraced by faculty, it's embraced by staff, it's embraced by other students. And so you come to a place in which you are affirmed, and we all know what that can do for an individual. And there is financial support so that students can worry less about working or loans, and we try to help defray the educational expenses. When the program began 32 years ago, every expense was covered. But as we have grown, we've had to look at a different model, but we try to support students as much as possible to provide that kind of support. And so again, we're looking for high school students, you know, particularly underrepresented minorities, African Americans, Latino, Hispanic students, Native students from Pacific Islanders, among others, and women in engineering are underrepresented. And so we're looking for those folks who are interested in an advanced degree. You know, we often get this question, how does a 16 or 17-year-old know they want a PhD or an MD PhD? And the truth is, they may really not. Some do, just by nature of, you know, our area where we live, the National Institutes of Health, Johns Hopkins, NASA, NSA, NIST. You know, so we're just surrounded by so much STEM in our area. So a lot of students get some exposure, you know, from neighbors or family friends or cultural groups or community groups, but there are a vast many who don't. But they know they do well in this area, they have a passion and a desire to do well, and they see themselves staying in it. And that's what we look for. We don't look for students who have all the answers and know the pathway. That's our role. We want to help. We want to find folks who are committed and passionate, even if you don't have a perfect GPA, even if you struggled in STEM. Not all of our students have perfect scores. A lot of them come with some challenges, with some uneven backgrounds and preparation, but we look for grit and determination and motivation, and that's terribly important. Because what we want to do is provide academic advising, support, encouragement, and experiences to help them be successful. And then we also work to help them address and combat underrepresentation in STEM. As you know, right now in our nation, there's some protests and unrest and all kinds of conversations going on about racism. And so our students have really taken that to heart and are having some really challenging conversations about racism and race in science and academia in STEM, particularly where we know the numbers are low. And so we're working with them to be prepared to be leaders in that effort, not just to be bodies representing, but to be minds and spirits who are there in these spaces, affirming and working for change. Just a quick picture of the first cohort of students. You know, this was 30-something years ago. And, you know, again, these were 19 Black males who were pulled together to come to UMBC and be a part of this social experiment. as we like to call it. And I won't linger on this. Mario spoke about this, but these are some key components of our program. Again, high expectations. We tell students that we expect you to do well, and you can do well. But I also will remind you that we don't just sort of arbitrarily throw that out. It is because we're going to resource them at a very high level with financial aid, with the 6-week bridge program that helps them make the transition from high school into the academy, with a cohort that helps to develop a sense of belonging. We have advisors and counselors on our staff who will work with them regularly for the next 4 years. We'll teach them how to work together collaboratively in peers. We will teach them how to be prepared for tutoring and mentors and summer research experiences, and to work with their faculty. So this is a quick slide about just what we expect to see in our students. You know, we want to develop students who have intellectual curiosity. Some of the many things that you mentioned this evening possess high standards, committed to science and research, comfortable discussing challenging issues of diversity and inclusion, and that they believe that excellence demands sacrifice, that it will be tough. These are tough disciplines, but it's doable when you utilize your resources, you learn to ask for help, and you learn to work with others. Terribly important. And so just a few more slides. Mario mentioned some of these things. You know, we're really proud of this. If 99% of our freshmen who start with our program will be retained in STEM after their freshman year. 95% of our folks who come to us as freshmen and go through our summer bridge program will receive a STEM degree at UMBC. That's terribly above other kinds of metrics. And some other metrics, you know, we have students who go on to receive Goldwater scholarships. As college seniors, they're winning the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Award. They are selected as valedictorians of UMBC, Phi Beta Kappa inductees as well. Mario mentioned this really quickly, and here's a slide that shows you just a bit of our success for folks who are considered Black and African American. UMBC is the #2 producer in our nation of undergraduates who go on, of Black and African American undergraduates who go on to earn STEM PhDs in the United States. As you'll see, the other institutions directly around us are all historically Black colleges and universities. UMBC is a predominantly white institution. Howard, Florida A&M, North Carolina A&T, Xavier, Spelman, Morgan, Hampton, Southern. We actually have to get to there's actually a typo here on this list, to number 10 on the list before we hit another predominantly white US institution. And then again, we come to another HBCU, another large white institution, and again, more HBCUs. When we look at those who earn the combined MD PhD, UMBC is outperforming Harvard, Hopkins, Yale, and all the 8 historically Black colleges and universities in terms of African Americans who go on to earn that combined MD PhD. And this is one of our students who completed one of those degrees. And I'll say, I love this quote. I found this on Facebook, you know, when she finished her MD PhD. This quote comes from our summer bridge program. Every cohort in the summer has a quote, and that sort of grounds them, and they come back to it in challenging moments. And I thought to myself, this young woman has finished 4 years of undergrad, 8 years of 4 years of medical school, 4 years of a PhD. So she's 8 years beyond UMBC. On the day of her graduation, she posts something from her first day at college at UMBC. She was taught this quote, "If I've seen further, it is by standing on the shoulder of giants," and thanked her Meyerhoff family who told her what an MD PhD is. And so when I think about this idea of social innovation, it is this idea that there are people who have ability and power, and they have promise, and they simply don't know. She did not know that this degree path existed. Right, and it blows me away that, you know, that this moment happened for her. Another student, Jamal, graduated from Hopkins Computer Engineering, and again on his Facebook post on the day of completing his graduation at Hopkins, he goes back to his summer experience at UMBC with the Meyerhoff program, and said, "I never would have even thought I was capable of making it this far." And so, I just say this idea of social innovation is so powerful. Meyerhoff exists because we want to demystify it. So I'll just give you a little bit about what we really do. in this cohort model that Mario mentioned, we work to demystify, to pull back the covers, to show the hidden curriculum, the things that people are never taught and shown and told, and that's not expressed. It's these unwritten expectations that we don't tell students, that only a few know, maybe from the best high schools who are connected with mentors or have family members, or if you're lucky, you figure it out on your own, or someone tells you bits and pieces and you still make it. And that happens, but that should not have to be the norm. We can engineer systems so that information is given and so that folks are informed. And it can be done in a way where it's collaborative. It's worked where folks are taught to share information, not to hoard it. It becomes customary for our students to become mentors and share what they know and share what they've learned and share how to do well in classes. It's not a secret. We're not going to hoard it. We're going to share it with as many people as possible, because that's how we make change, and not just incremental change, but exponential change. That's how we really move that needle, is by changing these systems and putting new models in place to give information to people, to make them welcome, incorporated, to show them what the systems expect, how they function, and what they will do for folks, and particularly the resources available. I'm always struck by the fact that students in the United States don't realize that, high school students and many college students don't realize that STEM degrees in the United States are by and large funded by our government. And so they don't know. They think I have to go get a job to get a master's degree or a PhD, and then I can work and save some money. And what they don't realize is their parents' tax dollars are funding these experiences, right? And the folks who are capable and have ability simply don't know it. Just a little bit my last slide here, a bit of program history. We had our first Rhodes Scholar, Naomi, in the class of 2018. And the slide here says, initially UMBC was not her first choice. She had applied to an Ivy League institution that will remain nameless, and was going there, and had gone on a visit, and she told them she wanted to major in chemistry. She wanted to major in physics. And they told her, don't do that. They said, you'll never make it. It's really tough. We've had some Black women who tried that. It's really tough. Maybe let's look at a different major. And when she came to visit UMBC, she told us that story. We put her in touch with 5 Black women who had PhDs in physics and said, we're not going to say that here. We're going to show you the people who did it, right? And luckily, she took us up on the offer, graduated, changed to chemical engineering because that was a better fit for her. Not that she couldn't do physics. Chemical engineering was a better fit, but was then selected as our institution's first Rhodes Scholar, and also for our program. And again, for an institution that, located in Baltimore, Maryland, which at one point was a slave state, to have a Black woman be our first Rhodes Scholar, that is some proof of the work that's happening here, and the innovation that's taking place, and the changing of minds of what's possible, and how we educate students, and how we bring students into the academy and acculturate them into the academy, into STEM as well. And so again, I'll just leave with this last quote, because this visual is emblematic of our program. We have folks of all races, ethnicities, backgrounds, identities, gender identity, sexual orientation identity. And I love this quote by Aristotle: excellence is never an accident. And everyone's talking about inclusive excellence, but inclusive excellence will not happen accidentally, right? It will be the result of high intention, effort, and intelligent execution. Many of those things that Mario mentioned will require intelligent execution. It represents the wisest choice, many alternatives. And I have a bit of contention with Aristotle on this one, but I get it. Choice, not chance, determines your destiny. But we are working so that the choices that are presented to folks are additive and informative in helping them make the best decisions for their destiny. And I think that is so key. So I thank you for the time to talk and share, and I look forward to questions that may come later.
Thank you so much, Director Keith Harmon. Our next speaker is Dr. Tahir Mahdi, who will be introduced by Dr. Leah Croucher.
Thank you so much, Director Keith. So our next speaker is Dr. Tahira Mahdi, who is a community psychologist and consultant based in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area. Tahira develops and facilitates workshops and presentations for community programs, businesses, organizations, and college, university students and personnel. She also consults to businesses and organizations regarding internal and external community matters, equity and diversity, and research and evaluation. A strong media background strengthens Tahira's work. Her early career work included programming and on-air work in radio and television, after she earned a diploma at the Broadcasting Institute of Maryland. Now based in Baltimore, Tahira has been an arts and entertainment journalist in the Washington, D.C. area for many years, contributing to independent media outlets such as Take Me Out to the Go-Go, with acting credits and a best-selling book for young Black women in her repertoire. She has also taken on the role of filmmaker and is currently producing a feature-length film with her husband and writing partner. Dr. Mahdi earned her BA, MA, and PhD in Human Services Psychology at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. She's currently co-hosting the regional tour of Go-Go history at museums, libraries, and other venues in Maryland, DC, and Virginia. She is also an adjunct assistant professor at UMBC, teaching community psychology and contemporary social issues. Dr. Mahdi?
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and talk to everyone. Okay, I'll let Mario do that. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I want to discuss models of community belonging specifically and how they pertain to social innovation. So specifically, building community in programs for underrepresented and marginalized groups. So the points I'll be making first is about the Meyerhoff Scholars Program and how it builds and maintains sense of community, as Keith Harmon just talked about. That's largely maintained through a specific attribute of membership, which is, a specific attribute or element of sense of community, which is membership. And my research on membership led to the development of a framework that I call being of the community. So I'll go over how a focus on being of the community centers culture and history, and how this model is used to strengthen a program and can be used to strengthen the program's sustainability. And finally, I'll show how the other important difference between having membership and being of the community is the difference between an individual saying, "This is my group," in reference to a community, and a community saying to an individual, "You are one of us." Next slide, please. This is the definition of sense of community from the 1986 Definitive Framework by McMillan and Chavez. And it reads, "A feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that members matter to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together." And this is one of the key components of the Meyerhoff program and how it keeps a strong bond between students that both Dr. Santo Domingo and Keith Harmon talked about. Next slide, please. And one element of sense of community is membership. And this is something that strikes me for the Meyerhoff program. And I want all of us to think about the communities to which we belong, specifically academic communities to which we feel a strong sense of community, and the membership component. So one definition is a feeling of belonging or sharing a sense of personal relatedness, and also a feeling that one has invested part of oneself to become a member and therefore has the right to belong. So when we think about investing ourselves, in our educations and having the right to belong to these academic communities to which we belong. Next slide, please. And I'll talk about the 5 attributes of membership that illuminate just one way that we strengthen bonds in our communities. And we've talked about these different programs. And once we talk about these membership attributes, and then I'll talk about the ones for being of the community, I want us to just think about how this might relate to one or more of our communities. So first is boundaries, and the boundaries define who is in and who is out. So in academic communities, a lot of times that means, you know who's in because they go to a specific institution, or you can name yourself for being a part of that institution or the academy. Emotional safety is said to be one of the things, and it's tied to security, which protects group intimacy. And a sense of belonging and identification is next. So this is a willingness to sacrifice. And I'm glad Keith Harmon talked about this, about excellence demanding sacrifice. And we may have all felt that in our academic pursuits, how much we had to sacrifice in order to get to where we are. And that's also an earning of the right to be able to say, this is my group. And personal investment means that you have worked to earn your place in that group. And then finally, a common symbol system that helps to maintain group boundaries. And again, this is just a membership, and you'll see how it is a little bit different when it comes to being of the community. So I'll be differentiating between, again, having membership and being of the community. Next slide. My dissertation research was on the go-go community, and this is a music cultural community that's related to a music genre called go-go. And this is a contextualized genre of music, mainly to location, which is the Washington, D.C. area. And it's also contextualized by race. So it's a majority Black community, but Blackness is something that a lot of people just apply to the community, even though it's not all Black, but it's something that a majority Black that kind of affects the way that people perceive the community. So a historical era also has something to do with it, because most of the people who call themselves members of this community are over 40 years old, and they came of age in the 1970s or early 2000s, where they were teenagers at a specific time. So it means a lot more to their development. And finally, not only media accounts, but my participant research describe this community as being economically and politically marginalized. And I'll be putting marginalizations of communities into these programs that we are developing and communities with which we work. A lot of times they're economically and politically marginalized. Next slide. So the 4 attributes to being of the community, first of all, permeable levels, personal knowledge of and experience, recognition, instead of this is my group, it's you are one of us. A common symbol system is the same, just like in membership, but however, instead of differentiating between us and them, this is to share and amass culture and history. Next slide. So as we see boundaries of membership, Mario, you can hit the button again. When you look up community, say Google Images, you see a lot of circles, people standing in circles. And this to me really illustrates the boundaries of membership, where we're talking about there are some people who belong to the community and people who don't. Next slide. With being of the community, developing this model with the go-go music cultural community, culture was important, and also things about location where it's a boundary, but it's not a boundary. It wasn't something where people felt they had to earn their right to belong. It was something that they were. So they didn't have membership, they are of this community. So as you see a core here, but there's also room for people who are supportive of the community. And instead of making a boundary where some people are either in or they're out, they're seen as potential members of the community. So that means through this interaction and through it being permeable, meaning you can move in, you can move out, people have the opportunity to become part of this larger community. Next slide. This is the original model that I came up with after speaking with this community. So as you see the core group there, this is a community that has personal knowledge and experience of the go-go culture, recognition, even a community ritual, which is through musical performance. From the stage, musicians are telling people in the crowd, you are one of us. They call names, they call neighborhoods, they call crews, different groups of communities who have come to share in an experience together. But this also makes room for other people. And my participants used 2 phrases a lot when I was asking who is really considered a part of the community if you don't personally know them, if you can't recognize them as being one of you? And they said they have love for us. They show love to us. And it might sound kind of like a slang or street term to me, but I had to really think about what that word love means. And they also used the word support. So love is something that we're not really allowed to use when we talk about science or when we talk about developing programs. But in the moment that we're in right now in 2020, when we're talking about racism, when we're trying to bring people together, we're not telling people, we're trying to get away from this us versus them mentality. So what we're really trying to do is change people's minds and get people to show more love and support for one another. So I do think that's important to lift up at a time like this and in this space right now. And also potential community, even talking about go-go music and culture, when people talked about people who didn't like the music or who were unfamiliar with the music, who even exploited or marginalized the music, they still had the potential to become a part of the community by showing love and support. And that really reminds me of the moment that we're in right now. Again, when we're trying to do things, as we're saying here in this conversation, social change for the common good, without love and support. And again, that's something we're not supposed to talk about if we're talking about hard science or developing programs or evaluation, but that is something that collectively people of culture really do talk about. When we do qualitative interviews and ask people what that means for people to be in community with them. Next slide. And the priorities between both, as you see here, so being of the community, again, this is something that someone just is. They didn't earn it. They didn't work hard to solidify their place. It's just something that they are. So cultural knowledge is important, love and support, as we talked about, but also the community itself gets to tell other people, you are one of us. And that's more important in certain community contexts. And it may be important for some of our contexts in the programs in which we work, as opposed to membership. But membership also has its place, and it also can be a really great way to strengthen bonds between people in a community or in a program. Belonging is a priority. Safety is a priority, but usually because they're saying us versus them, and you're supposed to feel safe within your own group. In my experience, interviewing members of the go-go community, safety was not, it didn't come up. It didn't even come up as something that's a realistic thing to expect. And that happens with a lot of marginalized communities around the world. Safety is just not something that one can expect in everyday life. And again, that you are one of us versus an individual earning the right to say, this is my group. Next slide, please. And finally, this is the model. So I took the word go-go out of it so that we could have an opportunity to just look at this and maybe apply it to different programs with which we work or communities with which we work, to look at a core community, people who have personal knowledge and experience of this culture, especially a marginalized culture, recognition where they know based on conversation and based on how they interact with people, whether or not this person is one of us. Sometimes we do this just by the way some people dress, by the way they speak, by the words they use. We can identify those people in our minds, that that person is one of us. Supportive community, again, demonstrating love and demonstrating support to people and their culture. It strengthens our community and it helps other people to build power. And by helping to increase the power of a community, that's when we start building numbers and get to speak to officials and policymakers. And those types of people will be supportive, and that's important. Potential community, again, if people disapprove of the culture, if they're unfamiliar, even if they're exploiting or marginalizing, we still see them as potential community, or they can be seen as potential community if they would hopefully change their mind and begin to demonstrate love and support to the community. That is my time, but I'm really excited to be able to share this with you, and I look forward to further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmadi. Let me now introduce our final discussant, Cecil Torrevillas Galicame is a graduate of Master of Arts in Teaching Social Sciences from DLSU Dasmariñas. She is currently the director of the Museo de la Salle and has worked with the museum since its inception in 2000, primarily as the museum's education officer. She finished her undergraduate studies from the University of the Philippines in Manila, finishing BA Philippine Arts, majoring in Arts Management in 1998, and worked previously with Metropolitan Museum of Manila as its Outreach and Educations Officer. She has attended and conducted various seminars and trainings related to museums. She specifically attended trainings for cultural mapping and sustainable development at Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam in 2006, museum education at Vienna, Austria in 2007, and 10+3 Cultural Cooperation Workshop in Beijing, China in 2016. She is a member of the International Council of Museum, or ICOM, and ICOM's Committee for Education and Cultural Action. And she is the current Vice Chair of NCCA's National Committee on Museums and President of the Southern Luzon Association of Museums, or SLAM. Ms. Galicame has a wide range of engagement with LGUs across the country, conducting cultural mapping. She is a member of the NCCA's Technical Working Group who developed the Cultural Mapping Framework for Project Busilak, Cultural Mapping for LGUs. Cecil?
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me well? So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share with you a bit about our programs at the museum. I'm not very much keen about social innovation. In fact, I'm not even so sure why I'm here, because from what most of you have shared, except for that of the Museo ng Morong, or the Morong Museum, most of you are really into the sciences, and our museum is really more into the social sciences and history museum. So anyway, I'm not sure if you will be able to find some merit in this presentation, but allow me to share with you a little bit of our efforts for innovation in our museum. So I'm sharing with you a product of a study that I did during my master's education, and I was able to develop this program called AMUSE. AMUSE stands for Animation Museum Education, because museum education in the Philippines is not a formal degree, unfortunately. There's no university or school that offers a full course on museum education, more so a master's or a PhD. So we rely greatly on materials from other countries. But in my master's studies, I was able to develop this one for our museum because we really need this. Our museum is a university museum under De La Salle University, Dasmariñas, and we were established in March of 2000. So initially, when we were established, it's like it's a new building, but it's like a Hispanic colonial building in the Philippines, but built entirely from scratch. And the main purpose at that time was to really house collections which got overrun by lahar from some old houses when Mount Pinatubo erupted in the late 1990s. So we had alumni who had no places to bring their collections into, and so the university initiated these efforts to build a building to house all this, mostly furniture collection, and thus led to the mission of the LSUD, or De La Salle Dasmariñas, into developing a museum, a university museum that will cater to the promotion and safeguarding of the Filipino heritage. So we've revised our vision and mission for some time, and this is now we were very clear that the purpose of our museum is really to safeguard Filipino heritage through education, because we're a university museum. So this is a photo of our comedor. So the entire museum is about 1,000 square meters. And the floor area, it's a two-story building, and it's like an old, we call it in the Philippines, bahay ni bato, or stone house, which became popular during the 19th century Spanish colonial period in the Philippines. So our museum's role is really geared towards education, and we're among the very few lucky museums in the Philippines who have already clientele because we have our students around us. So we're very clear with what we actually would like to do. But even then, museum culture or museum visiting is really not a very keen practice amongst us here in the country. In fact, it continuously becomes a challenge for us on how to encourage our students and our clientele to make museum going a real part of their lifestyle. And always we compete with entertainment establishments like malls and cinemas. And some museums in the country even made even would offer their museums for free, no fees. Still, we don't. Well, it's a challenge to get the numbers or the population that we want. So museums here continuously develop engaging activities. Some museums are now opening some of their entryways to the malls, so things like that. So us, being in a university museum, at first we would just have exhibitions and workshops and all. No clear cut programs that will geared towards engaging our students. So the challenge plus the challenge really was to how to engage our teachers on the use of our collection. In our experience, teachers would just bring their students to the museum, and then they would ask us to give their students a tour, and that was about it. And that's not exactly how we want our museums to become. So what we did, we developed the teachers are pedagogically challenged, by the way. So they didn't even know what's in our museum or how to use our collections for teaching, what to highlight, how to engage, nothing like that. So what we did, we intervened by introducing this innovation called Amused. So it's animation museum education. It's our education program geared towards engaging our community specifically on how to interact and engage with our collection. It's under the OBL program or object based learning concept that students would learn more or our audiences would learn more if they engage or interact with objects or museum artifacts. So it's like us promoting that the museum is an extension of the classroom. So we did this purposely uh, to promote our collection, but it was a challenge also because some of our collections are antique, so not all can be used or be able to, not all can be used for engagement. So we had to do some assessment. Plus, um, if we were to allow our own teachers to have a full autonomy on how to use our collection, we have to determine ways on how to make our collections more engaging without compromising their safety or the collection's authenticity and condition. So how did we do it? So this one is a faculty. The guy in white is a faculty who's engaging with our Barot Saya. That's the traditional costumes of Spanish colonial Filipinas at that time. Before we didn't allow this kind of interactions, but when we started innovating our education programs, we started allowing certain collections to be engaged with by our communities. So what we did, it's a two-way thing. We initiated the development of the module, but first we had to identify which are the targets. So we targeted specific. We aimed for syllabi integration, by the way, for our in innovating our program. So we identified for several. So we did syllabi integration for art appreciation, Philippine history, science and technology, so in society, that's STS, religious education, architecture. We even expanded to biology. And then we did consultation with the faculty on how they'd like this program to become, what engagements they are hoping to happen. And then we started developing the modules together. And we did workshops as well. Excuse me. So when we did the consultation, it was really like a stakeholder engagement. Um, it was challenging because some of our faculty were really unsure on how they on their roles, and some were even confined to the idea that a museum like us is really meant only for history and the arts and for the social sciences. So we had to exert extra efforts in making people from the hard sciences understand that they too have a stake, that they too have a say in a history and lifestyle museum such as us, such as ours, especially in the aspect of conservation. So somehow we succeeded in at least enticing them, or at least giving them the idea that they too are the people that we need in this kind of heritage work that we do. So when we did the consultation process, we did we introduced to them the module that we did. We did a workshop, an engaging one. We invited a facilitator who's into cultural education and who at the same time had a background in Filipino psychology. We needed that because we needed to understand how to get into the a deeper understanding of our audiences. So these two are faculty of the school. So we made them attend the workshop, and what they were doing here is to mimic an artwork that we had using whatever material they could find in the room. So it was just something to make them engaged and to give them an idea on how museum learning can be fun. So we developed these modules. We call it Museo de la Sal Amused modules. Amused really is, of course, we are amused when we are engaged, we find novelty in things, but of course our amused is an acronym for something else. So it's a very formal kind of module for education, but the teachers were not very much into this kind of modules. That's why we had to do a workshop with them, and we chose several champions. We did initial workshops only for about 10 people from different line of work or different fields of specializations. So this was a training that we did. We had to show them the details of our collections and explore which ones they would want to interact with for their specific um, core specializations. This was the only way that we thought, or the best way that we thought that the collections or the museum can be best utilized for education to really engage with the academe. So this is an example of the module that we produce. So we have this in printed materials and several pockets, and we give this to teachers in advance for them to be able to study and then apply to their classes as they wish. But our challenge really is, well, our desire really is for them to be able to just call us, book their tours or book their visits, and from there, do things on their own and bring their students with full with enthusiasm, and on their own they can explore our spaces. But at the moment we're still, because we introduced this only 2 years ago, and last year was supposed to be the full testing, but then some natural disasters came to the country, like a volcanic eruption and recently the pandemic. So we really have had no opportunity to check how this can be fully implemented and test the efficiency or effectivity of the program. Because what happened when we did this or find this out to several of the faculty, they still had to seek our help. And there were instances that we at the museum would still be the ones to implement this instead of them doing this for their own classes. So I guess at that time that was maybe like we had to do some hand holding for them when we introduce innovations like this. So that's how we did the workshop. It was fun and amusing too. And we got good reviews also from some of the students when we tried testing this. To them, it was a different kind of museum learning. Some teachers also use technology as engagement, and so that's one faculty or one student copy at taking photo of our collection and doing it in clay. And then after which they use the Flipgrid technology to upload all their outputs on the internet. So that's part of the module that we designed there. And then they created a vlog on how they made the reproductions using clay. It was engaging. I don't know if you call this social innovation in your own description, but that's at the most that we have in our museum. So right now we have some modules for art appreciation, Philippine history, Cursong Rizal or Rizal course. We were able to develop one for STS or Science and Technology for Philippine architecture. We've expanded our modules to STEM. For the STEM students, we actually took this opportunity also to not only engage with them, but to do on-the-job trainings for them on the aspect of basic conservation, mechanical cleaning only, exposing them to documentation. So the STEM senior high school students are engaged in that. We also did this for the HUMS or the humanities and the tourism students that we have in the campus. So the challenge now is really how to be the mediators between the faculty and the students, and how to empower the teachers or the faculty on how to use these modules on their own. That really is the challenge at the moment in our museum. But we're hopeful that when we succeed in implementing this program, it will really become something that will become a lifestyle for at least not a large community, but at least for our university at the moment. Because of the lockdown, we've started exploring also this program called Ang Sabi ni Lola, or What My Lola Says or Grandmother Says. We also recognize the value of cultural heritage and of understanding our own Philippine heritage in preserving or safeguarding our culture. So we tried engaging with our publics by using some of our collections to solicit discussions. So this we started just last May, and it has yet to pick up. It's a consistent challenge for us. And hopefully, again, we are engaging this next month or this coming school year with our students. And we're partnering with the academy, with the high schools on how we can partner, on how we can promote the safeguarding of heritage through several programs. And we've also doing some syllabi integration using this heritage programming in mind. So with that, that's all for our museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cecil.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to all our speakers. I was trying to catch the keywords that you have been using, collaborations, everyone's been using it, engagement, consultation, empowerment, earlier social justice, and it seems like all of them taken together, comprise, the broad definition of social innovation. But then we're not done yet. We are supposed to be doing some discussions, and I'll give the floor to Leah to talk about some of the questions that we'll be basing our discussions on.
Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you to our discussants. We seem to be way off of our time limit, but since this is supposed to be a discussion, let's reiterate some of the questions that may not have been that may have not been responded to by any of the discussants. The first one is, um, how can Philippine society foster more social innovation such, and I think this would be a question for um, Ms. Torrevillas Galicame. How can the Philippine society foster more social innovation such as Museong Pampayan ng Morong?
Can you can you ask it again? Can you say it again, please?
So how can Philippine society, or maybe the Philippine government, foster more social innovations such as such as your museum or the Museum Pambayang ng Morong, and
Good
what
question.
political and policy contexts are necessary to drive the community to safeguard its own heritage and patrimony?
Yeah, thank you for that question. The challenge really in the Philippines, because Museum Pambayan ng Morong is one of the museums under the Southern Luzon Associations of Museums, which I head at the moment. And going around the country, the challenge really among Philippine museums are several. So, in fact, Mario mentioned about it, that even LGU or local government museums, such as Museng Pambayan ng Morong, the first challenge would be the structure in itself or the building. Not all LGU museums have secured their spaces. So that's one thing that the museums in the Philippines must ensure. The spaces that they have, or the spaces where they are housing the museum, must be secured not by legislation. That's one thing that must be worked on first and foremost, because we have museums in the Philippines, especially for with LGU. They're big change depending on the political climate, unfortunately. So it shouldn't be like that, especially for museums under the local government units. Also, the local government museums should have separate mandates, and their governance should be clear, most especially their budget allocations for sustainability must be ensured. These are the constant challenges of museums in the country. Private museums such as ours are quite fortunate because we have our own different realities. But for LGUs and public museums, these are constant realities that must be dealt with. So, in terms of policies, me personally am advocating that the local governments should really should pay attention into putting this permanent frameworks for our cultural institutions, especially local museums in the country.
And perhaps for local government units to actually include in their education, not just national history or world history, but the history of their own towns and
Exactly, the local history, yes,
local
yes.
history, which will actually make it more interesting for the children, or even in high school, to think of their community as part of the continuum of history, right?
Right, exactly. In fact, I was very much interested with the sharing of Dr. Madi when she was mentioning about how we can permeate something like that to several communities. Like you have this small community, so how can you expand your community? It's a very interesting framework for our own realities here in the Philippines as far as cultural institutions is concerned. It's a constant challenge that we get stops and roadblocks every now and then. Uh, Culture is not among the priorities, especially at this time when pandemic is looming everywhere in the world. So I don't know, but another important thing that must be taken into consideration also for policy is the staffing. There are not much enough trained museum personnel in the country, not much enough trained museum managers. And the LGU, or at least in the Philippine setup, we have no Department of Culture. And so this also is not translated into the local government units of having their own cultural departments. That's why museums probably or cultural institutions are on a back seat or on the side tracks because we fail to put personnel to ensure that our institutions are safeguarded and are sustained. So maybe those. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This next question is probably for Keith and Tahira, since they have been working with the Meyerhoffs. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but the question is, can a program such as the Meyerhoff Scholars Program that seeks to increase STEM PhD degree holders be adapted and succeed in the Philippines as much as it did in the United States? I think the difference between the Philippines and the United States is that there is more racial division in the United States, and if I am correct, the original objective of Meyerhoff, specifically for Meyerhoff 1, is to give African American boys or males the opportunity for higher education. And as we know, in the American society, African American boys tend to be the victims of, they're usually the victims of racial profiling, let's put it that way. And from my understanding, the Meyerhoff program was started to correct this social construct about African American boys, that you can actually lift them up and become not just participants in society, but actually leaders and of a higher status, intellectually, maybe materially as well. Would you think that a program such as Meyerhoff, is that translatable to other cultures, for example, in the Philippines? Keith, would you be able to answer that?
Sure, Leah, I'll take a stab, and I welcome to hear Tahira's take on it as well. I would, my gut reaction is to say yes. I think there's some foundational principles and values at play that I would think could translate. Now, not being an expert on Philippine culture, I don't know what the nuances and where there may be some challenges, right? And I'm sure it is, because we've experienced that even with helping other US institutions adapt the model, right? We know institutions have culture and institutions have policies, and they have practices and there are things there that sort of didn't translate well from one institution to the next. So I could imagine the same thing happens with nationalistic culture, but I would also think that it's possible. We're talking about expectation, resources, bringing people together, getting university leaders to change the way in which they think students can work together and succeed, bringing resources to it, and changing the mindset about when people look at a group of individuals, what they think is possible, right? And so, whether that's socioeconomic, whether that's gender, whether that's race, I think there's models there. And Leah, I don't have it with me, but our provost, Philip Rouse, has a wonderful slide in which he shows how UMBC has taken components and aspects of the Meyerhoff program and built other programs to help faculty diversity, sort of one-off programs at UMBC to support large numbers of students, but perhaps using one component of the program, not all 13. And so UMBC has done that in a sense. So I think it's an interesting aspect. We've had one inquiry from someone in the UK about adapting the model at the Imperial College London. We haven't gotten a lot of traction with it, but it's just a conversation. But that's been our first international inquiry regarding that. So I think it's possible, and I think we're gonna have more conversations about it.
That's great. Although we probably have, the science high schools in the Philippines, they kind of also are breeding grounds for, they are in high school, but many of their graduates actually go into STEM programs. And there are some actually very famous scientists from our science high schools in the Philippines. Mario, you're raising your hand.
Zahira and then Cora have something to say to regarding this issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, in
Go
answering the
ahead.
question about adapting the program, it made me think about one of the goals. I was part of the evaluation team for about 6.5 years. And one of the goals is to get students to think like scientists and to associate themselves with science research and being researchers. I would even call it a bit of an assimilation. So just like when we talked about racial division, there are so many different systems, and we know that this education system, it's undergrad, then going to PhD, there are certain systems that are in place that some other people who are not of majority culture would need to assimilate into. And I think that's part of the success too. But as far as adapting it, I would be interested in wondering if you're in a space where I think Filipino students are still underrepresented possibly in sciences, like maybe in the United States, or you might be talking to people from different economic backgrounds or working with students from different economic backgrounds. But I'm wondering how the model of being of the community can work when you center culture first, and then with the rituals that are built into the program. Meyerhoff program also works with different rituals. So I'm thinking about, suppose a ritual every year is talking to or having a ceremony for somebody like Dr. Santo Domingo, saying you are one of us, using that ground up type of empowerment, where selecting a group of students and really focusing on their culture and what they need. And it also reminds me of the first talk about the living wage, or about how to make a good life, things that are culture specific. And first learning about that and having a group of students and finding out what's important to them and their culture first, and then talking about how do we make science ours, because these are voices that we really, really need. And that's part of the, explaining how people are underrepresented. And these are voices and in minds that we absolutely need in order to really do anything for a social good.
And I think Dr. De Ongria also has something to say about this. Could you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes,
Could you
ma'am.
just vocalize whatever you
Yes,
wrote?
ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. This has been a discussion point for a while. I'm actually a graduate of the Philippine Science High School that you mentioned. For the ones who are not familiar with the Philippine Science High School, this is science high schools that are sponsored by the Department of Science and Technology. So we take 2 entrance exams at the age of 11 or 10. And by first year high school, those who pass the exams are then taken to the National Science High School. And I think there are about, I'm not sure exactly how many regional science high schools there are all over the country. And the program is actually adapted to more science-based subjects. And this is to encourage students to, we're actually required to take a science course once we finish high school. Given that our sciences are more, our curriculum is more science-based, it increases our opportunity for scholarships at the university level. So there is a very high rate of Philippine Science High School students getting scholarships from the DOST to further the degree in any of the universities in the Philippines. So that's more or less what science has. And the important part here is that the science high school, since when I finished, there was only one high school. Now there are, I think, about, I don't know if it's about 7 or 8 different schools all over the country, which means that young students, and this was what we recommended when we finished, taking somebody out of your home at the age of 12 and bringing them to Metro Manila, getting them to stay in the dormitories was actually not very good for some of the students. They had problems in terms of adapting to the urban communities. In addition, some of the students are actually from indigenous peoples or indigenous cultural communities that also have their own culture different from the urban or regional populations. They have their own practices that the Metro Manila teachers do not fully understand. And therefore, there were some instances where the cultural adaptation, more than the intellectual, was actually too much for the students, and they had to go back to their families and not finish the scholarship. The OST addressed the recommendations of many students and teachers, and actually started building and have built regional high schools. Now, one of the things that was discussed earlier is if it could be adapted, if the Meyerhoff program could be adapted such that those that have been discriminated for whatever reason could have greater opportunities to undergo or to pursue degrees. And since my work, we do a number of field work in terms of going to different communities, including indigenous communities that are geographically isolated. In the field, I have encountered a lot of students who give importance. Filipinos give importance to education. However, they are stopped. One, because economically they cannot take the entrance exams. Second, they feel that they have responsibilities for their families to stay and till the land or earn money. And 3, because they feel that they will never be successful. Now, without mentorship, without encouraging the students who are found were actually very intelligent scientifically. You take them to the forest, and I don't know all the scientific names or the properties of the plants and animals in the forest. But the students, these kids, actually would say, and I remember one incident, I was saying, I am very thirsty and I forgot my bottle of water. And one of the young guys said, "Ma'am, you're really thirsty, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." He grabs his knife and then cuts a particular, I don't know what plant it was, and there was some sap. And he said, "Ma'am, that is safe to drink, at least until we go down the mountain." And then, of course, I took that, and that allowed me to address my thirst, and we were down. And then a lot of these things, there is inherent in those communities because they have to survive. They know the science, not the way we see science, but they know. Except that when they have to pursue this at the university in a format that is not what they are used to, they are discouraged. So what I see in the Meyerhoff program is its adaptability for us to really look. Definitely, there are some populations, there are some communities which are discriminated against. And I've been to Tawi-Tawi. You can look it up in the map for those not in the Philippines. It's the most southern island in Mindanao. The Badjaus there who still live in silt houses in the waters, there's a high percentage that do not go to school. But they are fantastic divers, fantastic fishermen, and fantastic people who could conserve the bounty of the sea. And they are discriminated even by the same locals living in the same provinces. And I'm not mentioning the names of those locals, but I have personally encountered how opportunities for them have not been given. So this disparities in the social context actually exists, and we need to accept. It's not necessarily just by color, because we were talking about Black Americans, but it's not necessarily by color. It's also where you believe you are as part of that community. If you say that you are part of this community, and that's a danger. If you do not recognize and that there are different cultures in the Philippines, this is why we want to contribute genetics into it. If we do not discuss the diversity of the cultures in the Philippines and recognize these cultures for what they are, then those people and the next generations will actually refrain from saying that they are from those cultures because of the discrimination against them. So this is what I think the Meyerhoff program properly studied and properly adapted, could take off in the Philippines, ma'am?
Yeah, it seems like a similar form of social disparity can also be like the source or inspiration for a Meyerhoff-like program in the Philippines. But I would also like to point out that, of course, we cannot adapt or replicate, in total, a program like Meyerhoff in the Philippines. It cannot be used as like a cookbook. It may neither be replicated, but can be perhaps adapted using some forms of indigenization. I'm now talking like a Sikoloyan Filipino fan here. We can actually form or establish or organize a model in using local resources, local concepts, local culture, like Kapwa, to form or organize, a model similar to a cohort-based model that Meyerhoff is using. But let me just jump to a question from our audience. Can I, Alea?
Yeah, sure.
I'll just read this, and perhaps maybe Ton or Joe can share their thoughts, they may have already responded to this earlier. But the question from Niceto of Poblador, I'm not sure whether he's still here. There are fundamental differences among social, technical, and administrative systems that imply differences in social, technical, and administrative innovation. While technical and administrative systems consist of given sets of procedures and practices, there is nothing given in social systems, which are complex systems that are in continuous state of flux and are extremely sensitive in their initial conditions. Changes made in any part of the system may result in unpredictable and undesirable changes elsewhere in the system. What then are the major characteristics of social innovation that distinguish it from technical and administrative innovation? What strategies should be put in place to capture the interaction effects within and among systems? Anyone who would like to respond to that complex question? Joe?
Sir, I think Ton addressed a portion. In his presentation, Ton addressed some ideas related to the question when he defined social innovation. Social innovation as changing what is, new practices, all for the benefit of a social good. So what makes social innovation different in character from all other types of innovation, I guess, it's that intention that it should be for the good of specified set of actors, and to be able to achieve that, it is implied that social innovation processes would have to be participatory, would have to be dialogical, would have to be collaborative, and would have to be an ongoing process of trial, learning. It's research. It's doing, learning from what you did, and then iterating it. And I think you've already also mentioned that in your presentation. So I guess my answer to that first part of the question is that it's the definition of social innovation as being for meeting a social need. But sir, can I just take this opportunity to add to Dr. De Ongria's point earlier? I wanted to say that I do agree that a mayor of type of program, which is basically to make STEM education more inclusive, is being done and should also be continued in the Philippines. No? Not to to include not only indigenous peoples from indigenous communities, but also women or girls, from especially those who are from the more economically deprived families. But having said that, making STEM more inclusive, I also wanted to add that inclusion is not necessarily simply being able to gain access to what is already provided. I think inclusion would necessarily entail, from our discipline sociology, we have this concept of a critical analysis of knowledge production. So if you consider science, if you consider STEM as a type or a form of socially produced knowledge, then to be truly inclusive, that form of knowledge should also be amenable to all other forms of knowledge. As mentioned by Dr. De Ungria earlier, there are indigenous forms of or ways of looking at the world, no? Indigenous cosmologies, sometimes dismissed as irrational or unscientific, but these are forms of knowledge. These are forms of knowledge, and therefore STEM education should also be inclusive in that sense, to include all other dismissed and absent, silenced forms of knowledge.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I think at this point we have actually like only 12 minutes before 11. So I think maybe we can ask for parting words from our discussants before we conclude this session. Like a 2 to 3 minute final words from our discussants. Anyone who wants to start?
Why don't we just do it as in the same order as they spoke tonight? Can we start with Jose Antonio? Is he still around?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Lei. Well, just once again, I'd like to say thank you to all the discussants for sharing their insights and their experiences. It sounds very hopeful that things can be done and things can be adapted in our context. But also, then we get to see the myriad of challenges and also the possible things that we need to work on. For instance, funding, the need for an office, the need for a dedicated staff, and especially for a lot of large programs to be more sustainable. But I think what I'm getting here is that the intellectual exercise of defining social innovation is important, and especially maybe if we're going to do research about it. But again, what I got is really to not be bogged down by what is social innovation, but just to think of what are the programs that you think can be helpful, and then just work towards that, and then see how you can improve and iterate as you move along. So thank you so much for this opportunity, and I learned so much from everybody.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Dr. Ongria?
Yes, ma'am. I was just scribbling here. It's a bit challenging. I was scribbling here really, and my research interest lies in DNA, in genetics, and really trying to prepare this talk, I had to I tried to understand a bit more what is expected. However, as the discussion proceeded, the more it confirmed our developing or evolving idea that scientific data, and that's what we're encountering now, scientific data just such as genetics, although it provides objective information to be able to understand our genetic prehistory, our current genetic makeup and potentially predict what is the future. Genetics or science, pure science, cannot stand on its own, but must be understood in the whole context of the social being, which is part of being human. And therefore, in the discussions today, I could see very well the reality of conducting studies which involve not only the pure sciences, but in stretching our hands to invite social scientists. And we have started that. In some of our work, we have invited linguists, also cultural, not just physical anthropologists, but also cultural anthropologists, because we need to understand why people form families, why they choose to be part of a community. Those are not genetics based. Those are part of that sense of belonging and membership. Why will I choose this person over another? Because there is something that unites us with each other, and therefore we form our family. And then, of course, genetics follows through the generation. Also, one thing that I've understood here is the essence of really defining that discrimination still exists in the Philippines. And I've understood here more in the Mayor Hof program. We think that we're all, good, etc., etc. We look after each other. But the reality is there are still those communities, particularly those that have been pushed out of the urban areas, more geographically isolated communities. And I've been around Tawi-Tawi, and I've been around Mindoro, and I've got people in Sulu. Those are people that have been discriminated because of their belief, because of their culture, and I've been with some of the Negrito communities because of their phenotype, their skin, their color, their curled hair. They have been discriminated. And we must recognize the problem in order to provide possible solutions to overcome those discrimination. And that's what I think the Mayor Hof can offer. I found that the best teachers for the young generation is not us from the urban communities. It's for us to mentor those who can be teachers for their own communities. Because those people, those kids from their own communities understand the culture and has an appeal. There is one student, and I'm not going to name his name here, but there is one student who graduated from UP Manila, one of the first AITA who graduated from UP Manila. He's back in Pampanga to his community and teaching there. So that now more students, I hope, from his communities are being encouraged to also try being educated and then go back to their communities in order not only to teach the objective information, the sciences, in the way we understand it, but in the whole context of their culture that we do not fully understand. In the social discourse of understanding our history, it needs to be multidisciplinary. History, linguistics, anthropology, archaeology, genetics, in order to present what really happened in the past, in order for us to appreciate what is happening in the present, and to offer that wholeness to the future generation. And in that, I think I end. Thank you very much.
Joe?
Okay. Again, thank you to the organizers for this opportunity. I would just like to give this parting comment that engendering development and empowerment requires reflexivity and sustained dialogue that dissolves traditional barriers between disciplines, cultures, and social statuses. There's a global movement towards human-centered technologies, but these technologies are also discourses. So for us to achieve the disruptive and transformative potentials of engineering, design, and development, it is necessary to recognize end users as knowledge partners. They are knowledgeable and they should be as partners. Therefore, human-centered technology would have to be deliberately participatory and empowering, and should also facilitate a truly interdisciplinary collaboration. Towards this, engineers, those who are trained already in STEM, is faced with a challenge. They would have to rethink their entire education, because if it relies primarily on science as the most reliable way of knowing, and on the scientific method as a dominant method, it would be difficult to put community at the center of problem-solving equations. Engineering students would have to learn to listen to context to be able to come up with workable, feasible, and appropriate solutions. And just to end, if I may quote Gustavo Esteva, a community activist in Chiapas, Mexico, posing a challenge to engineering students, who come and go to their communities. He said that, and I quote, "Don't come here to our community to help. Come here to listen, to find out if our community struggles are your struggles, and then and only then can we sit and discuss how, if at all, we can work together." End of quote. So production of knowledge is really reflecting about your own way of thinking and being open to dialogue and respect the point of view of the other. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much, Joe. The next is Keith.
Thank you, Mario. I don't have much to share. I would just simply say, there's been talk about the Meyerhoff model, and I think we've just really, Mario can tell me, we just sort of touched the surface of it. There's a lot of complexities, Mario, and Tahira can tell you. And I think it is pretty rich in what is there and has potential. And so I would welcome conversations or exchanges for folks to learn more about it. And I've learned a lot this evening, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Tahira?
Yes, I just thank you all for everything you've said tonight. It's such an honor to be in this discussion and to learn so much from you. And I do want to keep learning. My parting words are, please keep in touch. I would love to continue conversations and to learn more. And that's the most I can say, is that just thank you so much. And I want to know more. So please keep in touch.
Cecil? Cecil, are you still awake?
There. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I learned greatly from everyone. Maybe from the Philippine perspective a little bit. It's good to be enlightened, or maybe it's good that to develop bottom-up approach for, at least for the context of the Philippines. When I say bottoms up, we must find or develop champions, find models for us to be able to push forward whatever agenda that we have. The thing is, for policymakers or for sustainability support that we're pushing for, here we must have evidences for programs being successful already. And that's a continuous challenge. So it's important that discussions and conversations such as this are regular, and we push for engagements every time and collaboration as well. For STEM, for people like us in the heritage sector, we used to regard science and technology as, that's not our field, but no, not anymore. Because really, maybe for people like you also in the STEM, and I appreciate the sharing of Dr. De Ungria and Dr. Jo, maybe STEM should be understood also in the context of the local culture. So as I said, I'm doing cultural mapping for communities, and really there are indigenous science and technology practices all around, and these are undocumented. And maybe from it's good to understand the context of where this science and technology innovations can come from, especially from people such as you who are really into the hardcore sciences. And it's good going around and exploring indigenous communities and find this indigenous practice is really amazing, and peace must be documented. So I don't know what efforts can be done from people such as yours, but peace can be worked on, develop champions again, and maybe create programs, Meyer Hobbs models or whatever. But we need this if you want to push forward some policies in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mario, I think you.
Okay, so thank you all so much for agreeing to be part of this long night. We really, really appreciate your participation. As you have said, this will be a continuing conversation. It's really difficult to capture everything that we've talked about in a few sentences. One of the goals of this evening's or morning session was to somehow provide us some insights into what we can tell the government or other institutions about social innovation, what we can recommend. And I thought actually before this session, I've heard enough of what we can possibly actually communicate to them. But I've learned so much from tonight's discussion, and I hope you will be open to reviewing a summary of this discussion in the form of some policy brief or a position paper or a recommendation for relevant agencies or institutions for us to push forward what we want to happen in terms of social innovation in places where they are needed, for example, in the Philippines. And of course, I'm happy that somehow people are open to adaptation, for example, of the Marhov Scholars Program in the Philippines, using our own cultural framework, perhaps, and using our own context. And of course, the Museong Pambayang ng Morong, we hope to further, unpack, what took place in each formation and perhaps scale up, do some more work so that what we did in Morong can happen in other places. And of course, what you are doing in your own professions, in your own locations, in your own particular institutions, those are really very, very important. And I would repeat, would like to have a repeated, continuing conversation. Good evening to everyone. Good morning. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. Thank you very much, Leia. Thank you very much, Tahira, Cora, Joe, Keith, Cecil, and Ton. Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. Goodbye, and I'll keep in touch. I'll send you a summary and a draft proposal. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good morning and good night.
Bye po. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Thanks, Leia.
Salamat po. Good night.